The need for instructional leadership has never been more important in our nation's schools. The tidal wave of changes over the past decade in education policy, not to mention societal and generational shifts, has altered the way our classrooms need to operate and how our instruction leads to learning. What is clear now is that the training needs of leaders within these new environments has also changed, shifting the way in which we support leaders to be successful in their work, and the knowledge, skills, and dispositions necessary to generate that success has been the primary focus of two Connecticut districts, West Hartford Public Schools and Canton Public Schools. The impact of their professional learning programming on their leaders, teachers, and students is clear. In the past 5 years, we've had the opportunity to work with over 50 districts here in Connecticut, as well as with the Connecticut State Department of Education's Talent Office. And while each of the districts that we've worked with has done a truly an excellent job in committing to their staff's professional learning, what we've seen happen in West Hartford and Canton truly has made a difference. We see a laser-like focus on leadership development with the target of improved outcomes for kids through high-quality classrooms. This fall, we held a roundtable discussion with some of the leaders from these two districts to talk about the impact their district's professional learning has had on them, their teachers, and their buildings as a whole.
Just from a district perspective, it's helped us tremendously to really focus on what's happening in the classroom, and particularly what our administrators are doing to assist teachers relative to improving student learning. It's really helped us as a district that from a human capital standpoint, I don't believe we had the capital to really provide all the expert training that we've been receiving and to bring in a consultant to really guide those conversations and really drill down and have experts come in and work with our staff.
Well, I think as a district, we needed someone to help us start that conversation. And we needed to engage our members in that conversation because everyone, I think, was a little anxious and skeptical over new initiatives around teacher evaluation. And so we had to bring that level of anxiety down, and people were invested in the process. And the outcome of it was critical, which was a common language for people, a common definition and a common way to articulate what we would define as exemplary performance in a classroom.
What was exciting about it was that the work was grounded in our own instructional framework. So I'm sure you found it, Ken, as we found. This was a framework developed by our teachers, and we were then determining what those attributes of quality teaching and learning looked like and sound like in a classroom, but it was grounded in our own frameworks. And that's important. It's not something we purchased or bought wholesale from something. It was our own lens on our own framework, and I think that brought a sense of validity to the process and made the teachers and leaders who were involved in the development of our instructional framework feel that much more validated for what they brought to the table. So it wasn't a top-down process. It was really taking work done by a team and bringing it forward.
And the trust factor, I think, evolved from that.
I came into this process as a brand new administrator, and the most valuable piece for me was sitting through collegial calibrations and really looking deeply at our instructional framework and going through that process with not only other elementary principals, but secondary principals, assistant principals, as well as department supervisors. And it really helped me, somebody coming in thinking, I really need to be the master of the content that I'm watching and look at that piece to really effectively evaluate teachers. It really broadened my perspective to take a step back and look at just purely teaching and learning in the classroom and what that looks like from those different perspectives, people at different levels. Really helped me understand how the instructional framework applied to a really large variety of classroom settings.
That was probably one of the most powerful parts for me, is to go into a room with 6 or 7 other colleagues who who I respect, and then when you come back out and you talk about what did you see, and you get, everyone's great at something when they go into a classroom to observe, but to hear and get the best of what everyone has to offer and then bring all of that into my practice, I mean, I'm literally creating twice as much, or collecting twice as much data as I used to when I come in out of an observation. Because now I'm looking at it through, this is what Natalie sees, this is what Ryan sees, this is what Jerry sees.
I think we started with what kind of evidence do you gather, how much? Yes, the multiple viewpoints on one, kind of zooming in on this thing when I go to the classroom, and some of the colleagues, our colleagues would be focusing on other things. So kind of broadening our skill set to say, here's the robust piece of evidence. And then going back to those descriptors of what the exemplary practice looked like. Great, I just walked out of a classroom with a whole bunch of evidence. Now, have I effectively tied it back to that rubric? And then the so what part of the conversation, so what? And that actually brought us back to the evidence, because more and more over time, we're making the shift to what the outcome is from student learning. So just taking a look at beyond some initial engagement, beyond some of the initial questions, what are we seeing as a result? So we kind of started with that broadening of evidence. We had to make sure it was connected back to the rubric and know where pieces of evidence were connected back to our rubric. The so what conversation with the teachers. What's your next step, regardless of where that piece of evidence falls in the rubric? What's the next step? And then over time, it's going to let us right back to that evidence piece to say, what are we seeing as a result from students to show that they do have it, they don't have it, how do they have it, where are they missing, and what can happen differently in the classroom to help get them along.
Claim Connect action has come up a couple times in the conversation. That had the largest impact on me as an observer. And then during that post-observation meeting, so what I found myself doing prior to all this training was if the teacher was solidly in that 3 range in a 4-point rubric, I did a lot of Claim Connect, right? This is what I saw, this is how it connects to the rubric. Nice job, right? If they fell below the 3, then I would get involved in the action. Well, this is what we need to do to move forward. And after Claim Connect action, I can sit with my 3 teachers and help them get to that 4. So now that action piece is a part of all of the post-observation meetings. Regardless of where you fall on the rubric, there's always a so what, as you mentioned. There's always the next steps for you. And that has had a huge impact on teachers that are used to hearing, great job, now, but what's next for you? And how do I help you get even better and improve your practice? And the teachers have been very happy with that feedback because they want to improve too. They want to get to that next step as a professional. So just that action piece and how it connects to all teachers and not just the ones who are struggling.
We're a much smaller team, which I think it's good to know that the West Hartford Public Schools is a larger school district than ours, that we have a team of 9, I believe, and you probably have a team of
70.
70. So when we get to meet, we're meeting 6 times with our staff developer, that all of us are there and we break it out, and then we get to continue the conversations. But I would say one of the first things that we really had to do was, before we were able to provide feedback to teachers, we needed to understand our rubric, we needed to understand the attributes, we needed to understand what exactly were we looking for evidence that makes up those attributes, because if we didn't have those conversations amongst ourselves and practice amongst ourselves, it wouldn't have been a fruitful conversation with the teacher. It would have been just like any conversation that we've had.
The idea of claim, connect, and action, when we think about the claim, it's aligned to that instructional framework. So the claim isn't just coming from something from my own personal belief or Jeff's own practice or any of our practice as educators and as administrators. The claims come directly from our instructional teaching framework. So they're there for us. That's our guide, those are our guiding principles.
It was interesting to me that narrowing focus wasn't limiting at all either, because we would focus on maybe a particular domain or a particular attribute, but in doing so, we would dive so deeply into it that the conversation itself would develop with the variety of different, even with the variety of different administrators in the room, it would develop a pretty consistent structure. So I noticed that in moving out of our collegial calibration sessions, where we would focus on 1 or 2 attributes, then going into practice in the classroom, I would find that because I had developed that kind of consistent structure of conversation, the content in the conversation might differ depending on what piece of the instructional framework we were looking at, yet the structure of that conversation and how the feedback was delivered and how the evidence was cited was fairly consistent. So I felt a higher comfort level of moving back and forth between different pieces of our instructional framework, having gone through that experience and having really dived deeply into that narrow focus.
I think all of these practices that we've employed have pushed the focus to the student, so that the purpose of teacher evaluation is looking at impact that instruction has on students and their actual growth and learning. And it's not so much about the teacher any longer. And that, when you're pushing it back to the rubric and you're looking at evidence, that evidence really is about what the child is doing. That also started to turn the mindset of the teachers when, with the Claim Connect action being a formula per se of delivering feedback, it became about the child and not about the teacher action. And so I think the teachers began working harder at trying and being a little bit more risk takers to try to get different outcomes for students. It's a paradigm shift for them also to have an observer in the classroom moving around and chatting with students.
Big time.
I always shifted on both the student and the teacher, but I think my deeper dive with the calibration process has really forced me to think about the connection between the two. So the pad of paper with the teacher and the student on each side, I'm looking more for what's between that. What's the interaction between the teacher and the student?
Well, I think, some of the skepticism at the onset of a new initiative relating to teacher evaluation is, what is the outcome for me as the teacher? And this, we've always said, this is really about growth. And using the Claim Connect action strategy and ensuring that every teacher gets some sort of feedback makes it about growth for everyone. And so it really starts to reveal that, yes, we really mean what we say. It is about growth. It is about everybody getting better. And it's about everybody getting better at working with all types of students.
Yeah. They preferred to work in pairs, as Ryan was saying, but with the staff developer right with them. So we were going to do the observation in pairs, and then we would write the report up, and then the staff developer would be there with the two administrators and the teacher. And one administrator providing the feedback, and the staff developer just sitting at the table also and coaching that administrator as they speak to the teacher. And the teacher, no pressure for the teacher, all pressure on administrators and department chairs. And I was like, that's really what you want? And they said, yes, that's what we want. I said, done, not a problem. So we're making that's happening in the next month for us, that our staff developer is going to be coming and coaching our administrators one-on-one in how they're observing and how they're evaluating, and more importantly, how they're providing that feedback. So, and our teacher unions are very supportive of the idea. They want to be a partner in this mission that we're on. So,
And that was day one of a 2-day calibration training. So that was with part of our group. The second part of the group had the training next day, and we decided on the spot to try that out live.
Yeah.
And we had a very gracious teacher who was willing to take that risk. And you mentioned risk-taking before. And the notion or people's interest and availability to do some of that risk-taking has shifted over the last few years. And as it's related to this work, as it's related to continued emphasis on different mindsets and being in the right or being in appropriate mindsets for growth. All of those things, I've seen a big shift in everybody's willingness to be a little bit messy with the process, being okay with that, being okay sitting with a colleague and talking about personality types or giving feedback on feedback. And that's a huge linchpin in this, and it's been part of the development as we've kind of gone through this training, as we've involved teachers in it. And I've been pleasantly surprised at every step along the way how willing teachers and colleagues are willing to step into that realm and be okay with it getting a little bit messy.
I can articulate what it took last year as a new person to her role to move from a 2 to a 3 to a 4. I could articulate it after the first year of being involved in this process. But after the second year of being involved in the process, the teacher can now articulate for herself, I know where I need to move, and in her pre-observation, and then in seeing it in practice, she was able to move her practice in 2 years to be more exemplary practice. So that first step was my being able to articulate in collaboration with my colleagues what it takes to move along our continuum and show that continuous growth. But for then the teacher, after a couple of years, to be able to do that for herself, that she herself can look to that instructional framework and say, here's what I think I need to do, and in a pre-observation, identify it herself, and I could then coach her. So that blurred role that you talked about, Ryan, I think I can serve in a better coaching capacity as an evaluator by knowing and articulating what each attribute of that framework really means and coaching to that specifically.
Well, those domains now are in our instructional practices, in all our professional learning opportunities, within our school goals, we're really focusing on student learning framework and what a student learning framework is and what encompasses the student learning framework. But we also know that our attributes within our rubric go hand in hand with that student learning framework. And that I can't remember as a teacher ever having conversations with administrators or colleagues, oh, this is what this is, and this is what this looks like, and this is examples of this attribute. So what we're trying to do right now is really analyze the student learning framework and then try to put it in places of where is it within our attribute and what exemplars would show that. And I don't ever remember having conversations like that as a teacher. So it's actually an exciting time to be a teacher new in the game and a principal really being able to have that professional learning environment, but there needs to be training that goes with that.
There's a level of consistency and good description of it. There's also a level of the descriptors in there are about students. So just that in and of itself, the conversation at the end of the day with teachers is that much more meaningful, because at the end of the day it is around that student-centered learning framework and how that's described in that exemplary practice, because it comes back to the students. And that obviously resonates with teachers, resonates with me.
And that was the big shift. When teachers were really looking at the framework and trying to understand it and were working together, that 3 to a 4, that, all right, I have to turn over some of this responsibility now back down to the students. And that's huge. And it's been exciting for the teachers. Even my kindergarten teachers say, my kids can do that. I think they can do that on their own. And really forcing kids to get to that leadership role and extending their own learning, that's been fun and really powerful.
I believe it's made our curriculum stronger. It's definitely made our teaching stronger, but I think when we're developing and writing curriculum, it just to your point, that maybe what was good for a first grader to do last year, if a teacher feels that, well, wait a minute, if they can stretch themselves, we may be able to change and revise our curriculum to make it stronger than it was and what it currently is.
I talked about this at a staff meeting, and as I was walking through self-assessment measures for kids, I wasn't noticing that. And what a high leverage and powerful area of the framework. Because for a student to be able to self-assess, the teacher has to clearly articulate what it is that the student needs to be looking for, so that benefits the teacher as well. So I mentioned that, and then at the beginning of this year, one of my teachers created a professional growth plan for the year on creating self-assessment measures and said, here's the plan. If anyone else wants to join me, almost every teacher in the building has joined. So now we have this building-wide focus, K-5, on self-assessment measures and what it looks like for each of the grade levels. And that just came from a conversation about the framework.
We had a staff developer work with us and clearly define the criteria for success for our process. Not just on, the product itself, but I knew going into those observations and to the conversation that in the end, there were some criteria upon which I was going to be evaluated, but not in any sort of in a growth mindset kind of way. So in essence, the experience we had really paralleled what the teachers had. We had a rubric, a clear criteria for success. We received specific feedback, evidence-based feedback that referred back to our written observation notes. And it was helpful. It was hard feedback at times. There are things, after being 10 years as an administrator, you think, oh, I've got some practices down. I know how to write an observation. I've done this hundreds of times at this point. And receiving that objective feedback has really shaped my practice. There's no question.
Again, the whole process is something that takes time, and that's important because it's a development of ourselves over time. I mean, when you look at the feedback we get from the developer, and I go back into the rubric that was used, it's a great opportunity for me to go back and look at my growth as an evaluator and the pieces of evidence I used and the way I would give feedback. And the timing of that process was excellent because I got, very immediate feedback from those collegial calibration sessions that I could then internalize and use literally the next day or that same week as I was going around and doing observations within my building. And, it also serves as kind of a constant reminder for moving forward as well. I mean, I initially started this process 3 years ago, and now, having been 3 years removed from that, I still have those sheets with the rubric, with my feedback on it, and it helps me start every year as we begin, as teachers set their goals and we begin doing observations. It really helps me frame myself in terms of where I was and where I'm still continuing to go. And I think that's an important part of the process because that's what we're asking our teachers to do is to be reflective and think about where they've been, where they are, and where they want to be. And really that's the same thing they're asking the students to do. So to be able to have a tangible piece of feedback that is so specific to things that I saw with a group of 7 to 9 people, to then sit on my own and look at that, bring that experience back, and then go out there and hopefully have a more positive impact on learning. I mean, it's very powerful. It's motivating, it's encouraging. Sitting down with my administrator, I feel so much more confident speaking just about the state of learning in my building. I felt more and more confident as I've gone through that process, just again because of the great conversations that I've been able to have that are so deeply rooted in the instructional framework, in the learning that's happening across the building, and both in positive and negative. I mean, it's just made me so much more aware of things we have to be proud of and things where we really need further development in, with teaching and learning. And so that's definitely been a benefit. I've been able to articulate that much more clearly to my own evaluator.
Slight element of shock that the individuals who they thought were going to be visiting, just observing, actually got down on their knees, face to face, and started asking questions. I think initially they were a little taken back by that, but they were pleasantly accommodating. I think they're excited about what they do. So.
I would say the same thing again.
Yeah.
Over time, I think in the beginning it was a bit of a
It's
shock.
a different practice for them.
But I see a lot of active participation there, and it's so much more fun to do observations personally for me because there is more interaction, and it also again affords me the opportunity to then pass a child in the hallway an hour later, and give them a compliment or just say, hey, that was really great, or acknowledge what happened. Or even, we're in the middle of conference week right now, and when I'm sitting in on parent-teacher conferences, I love being able to say to a parent, boy, I was in for math the other day, and I talked to Johnny, and he said, and again, I think that has a big overall effect on our culture in the building, in our climate. It makes everything feel connected. It makes everyone feel as though we're on the same page, and we all really have a shared effort in moving students forward. From the administration, to the teachers, to the students, to the parents.
It was exciting to have students articulate why they're engaged in a particular task. And it stumped many children, but many children could easily articulate that. And it was exciting. It shows the growth, I think, of our teachers in moving toward more student-centered learning, that students can articulate what they're doing, why they're doing it, how those checks for understanding will happen. They're not just relying on the teacher to be able to do that, they can articulate it themselves, and how exciting for our students in their learning environments to not just be about compliance with tasks, but to really understand the purpose for what they're doing in their classrooms each day. So most students were pretty excited to share with us what they were doing and why. Tell us what you're doing was always the interesting question, but why you're doing it was exciting to ask and to hear the answers to.
And what happens next, and let me show you this, and wait a minute, I have that somewhere, and they go pull it out, and those are things that weren't happening the same way before.
What West Hartford and Canton Public Schools have accomplished in the past 4 years through targeted training and support for its instructional leaders has had a direct impact on teachers and students. In a 2015-2016 survey, 80% of the teachers rated the overall effectiveness of the feedback provided through the Educator Evaluation Program as very effective or effective in helping them understand how their practice impacted student learning during their observed lesson. Supporting teachers by shifting their observations from a simple assessment of practice to a careful examination of student learning has helped these 2 Connecticut districts create more substantial and meaningful outcomes from their ongoing supervision and evaluation practice. For more information on how these 2 districts developed and delivered their professional learning programming, visit our website at www.revisionlearning.com.